as we get ready to start. Good morning, everyone. We're here on a Sunday morning to talk insurance. So why don't we do that? It's a great day. Thank you again for being here. I know we have one more panelist that's trying to make it, but that's the story of COP today. If you can make it to the session, you've already won. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ricardo Lara. I'm the insurance commissioner in California, regulating the fourth largest insurance market in the world. And today we're going to have really a unique experience and panel to talk about how insurance will play a pivotal role in climate mitigation and adaptation in the future. And like we said, and our panelists can agree that the insurance can no longer be an afterthought in our discussions around climate or COP. It really has to be front and center because without insurance, obviously we can't we can't protect communities, especially our most vulnerable. So to frame this discussion today, I'm gonna first talk about a few overarching themes. First, we have I met with insurance regulators in the U.S. and internationally, and from the position we are seeing really increasing climate risk and a growing protection gap. The protection gap is in the difference between the total cost of disaster and the costs that are really covered by insurance, and the costs that are and if the protection gap continues to grow, more and more communities are going to be left behind. We cannot let that happen. Secondly, in California, to bring it back home for a second, we are seeing climate risk increasing and fewer insurance options in high wildfire risk areas. For example, I'll give you that in 2022 alone, 7 of the top 12 insurance companies in California, as Yoshihiro and I were talking this earlier, have paused or restricted writing new business. Flood risk also is growing, especially through atmospheric rivers, and communities are experiencing record-setting extreme heat, which is both the most deadly climate impact and rarely insured at all. Insurance can no longer, I said, be a side issue in climate discussions. It has become a central issue for so many of our discussions, from insurance for performance of solar panels to insurance for new technologies like electric heavy-duty trucks to insurance that enables recovery from storms. Insurance is important for our resilience throughout global economies and actually is an important process and an important economic juggernaut in so many of our jurisdictions. And lastly, what sustainable insurance looks like in the future is a conversation we're going to be having today. How can we close those protection gaps for extreme heat, for example? How can we achieve alignment in risk mitigation incentives between governments and insurance companies? And how can we create investments in nature to provide multiple benefits, including carbon sequestration and risk reductions? So today we have a great panel of folks that are going to be sharing their thoughts as we really continue to put not only insurance at the forefront, but start to think creatively of how do we use insurance to actually protect our communities, protect our most vulnerable, and most importantly, again, protect our planet. So we have Pam Kielly, who just made it right in time, our Associate Vice President at Environmental Defense Fund. Thank you for being here. We have Veronica Scotti, Chairperson of SwissRe, our public sector solutions. And Yoshihiro, my good friend, he's the chair of our Insurance and Private Pensions Committee at OECD. And so why don't we just kick it off and start asking questions? The plan here is to have a unique dialogue, and then we can hopefully get some questions from the audience. So Pam, to you, one of the major themes in climate policy is how governments can expand investments in natural infrastructure and restoring our floodplains, our wetlands. Increasing investments and protections of nature-based solutions was also really a cornerstone of our climate insurance working group in California, of course, of which EDF was a pivotal member. Can you walk us through why investing in nature has positive benefits for addressing climate risk?
Sure, and thank you so much, and sorry for being a bit delayed. Want to start by thanking you so much for your leadership in convening the Climate Insurance Working Group that our team was a part of. Really first of the kind recommendations in the country in terms of how the insurance industry can help address and reduce climate risk. And we're really excited to see how conversations evolve from here. We've all experienced and certainly seen the coverage, heartbreaking coverage of catastrophic wildfires across the West, flooding across the Southeast, Midwest, extreme heat events in the Southwest. And these events are increasing. They're increasing in frequency, they're increasing in severity, and they pose a really significant risk for human life, especially in overburdened communities, especially in communities that are already stressed by myriad other factors. These are also the same communities that the commissioner was talking about earlier that are least able to recover from events because of this protection gap between the risk and the insurance to cover that risk. So as we work to reduce, obviously, the tons of GHG that go into the atmosphere and mitigate the warming that's causing these extreme events, we also have to mitigate the risk from the catastrophic events that are going to continue. And build the resilience of our communities using every tool in our toolbox. One of those tools is actually investing in nature itself, not just hardening of the infrastructure, which is also critical. But by managing, by restoring, by preserving the natural systems, we can significantly reduce the risk of extreme climate events and make communities more resilient to them. I'll give you just a couple of examples. Healthy forest management can reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires. Prescribed burns to help return beneficial fire to the ecosystem can help avoid the really intense, rapidly escalating, deadly fires that we're increasingly seeing across the American West. That's one example. A second example is a full canopy of trees can actually increase urban cooling. Reduce urban temperatures, helping protect residents from the extreme heat events that we're seeing. And this is even more true in lower income communities where residents may not have the same access to air conditioning and other cooling strategies, in part because the housing stock may be older. Third example I'll give is restored wetlands and reconnected floodplains can really slow and retain water to reduce flooding. While filtering the pollutants and providing really critical habitat for wildlife. So I could keep going. I'll maybe pause there.
Yeah, we can.
Let someone else get in.
I'm enthralled because this is what I mean. This is one of the most, I think, exciting parts of our discussion around nature-based solutions and how do we're starting to see some great examples of insurance now entering into this space, not only insuring these critical nature-based, it's pretty much what Mother Nature has put already on this planet to protect us from extreme weather. And now we're starting to see, particularly in the global south, clear examples of how nature-based solutions are working and how we're using insurance to protect that and monetizing how much the preparing us not only for catastrophes, but the money that we actually save by investing in these nature-based solutions is critical. Veronica, I want to come to you and talk about reinsurance. I've had to become an expert on reinsurance, and it is something that I hear often, not only in our country, but from our insurance carriers about the need to really start working around what a reinsurance strategy would be in California. What are we doing to make sure we offset and make the reinsurance companies more attracted to continue to protect those insurance companies? But also the reinsurance companies have been really at the forefront of a lot of this work, and especially with our European counterparts in Australia and Asia. And all I keep saying in the United States, look at what the reinsurance companies are doing around the world and how they've led to really create these innovative products and really show that demonstration about that you can still be successful financially, you can create new products, and you can actually protect climate And so, can you describe for me the areas that you are working on to reduce these protection gaps that we're all talking about? And within those areas, some specific examples that you feel are the most impactful projects that SwissRe is working on?
Thank you so much, Ricardo. And I have to say, hallelujah. I mean, I wish the insurance saved the world. The reality is, um, our raison d'etre is to pool and aggregate risks.
Right.
And so it is in our incredible self-interest to make sure that those risks are well managed. And I think that should be the spirit that keeps us all together, united in wanting to do things that do build resilience ultimately. But I'm going to build on what Pam said, and I really want to praise the commissioner in California for actually having convened groups across different parts of, different walks of lives and expertise to try and have a constructive conversation. So that
Thank you.
we would love to see California, Florida, continuously be insurable and having affordability of rates and extensive coverage. And so we have to continuously work together to avoid market failures. Now, so how do we do that? I think I think looking at the room, most people know here, insurance is a market signal. So let me start with the basic. It's a way to say this is what we see about the risk. And the signal that we put in the market is for a specific year. We don't, but of course, we have to think much longer term. Especially reinsurers need to look really, really long term because we take more tail risk. And so the pricing, the premium, the structures that we put in the market, the inclusion, the exclusions are all signals about the risks and what needs to be managed. And if those messages are picked up, then it becomes very clear that there are interventions. And this is where I think as an industry, we can do a better job, being maybe a little bit more self-critical, a better job at being very clear about what those interventions for adaptive choices in our environment, in how we change the nature of the risks that we're exposed to look like. Because through that, we maintain affordability, availability, and an appropriate level of protection, and we avoid widening of protection gaps. Because we ultimately do thrive in a predictable environment. That's actually the reality. So what are we doing at SwissRe? I think we're doing two things. One is what can we do to reduce the vulnerabilities in our built environment, in our economic environment. And so we have a specific effort now for the best part of 2 years, and even here at the COP, about the business case for adaptation. Right. For me, this is really fundamental, even if it doesn't mean an insurance cover tomorrow, right. But it's so foundational to our ability to actually partner in society. And so we work along, if you will, three vectors. How do we make a business positive case for corporates? Because they have a lot of assets, right. And economic interests, and they need to be involved and engaged in these adaptation discussions. How do we engage the public sector, which I'm sure the commissioner knows creates the conditions, the standards, right. The building codes under which we all live. And whilst those are supposed to be the minimum requirements, often become the reference requirements. Right. So those requirements could be apt in an evolving climate environment. And of course, finance, bank and insurance companies need to be involved. There's been a very substantive effort in creating baselining from our organization and create transparency around these risks. Right. So what does the risk look today? What does it look like by the end of the century, right? It's very important. What are the hot spots? Right. And what can we do from a risk mitigation and a risk intervention standpoint? And in this passage, the gap that we continue to have is understanding and quantifying the value of these valuable adaptive interventions. So I think it is a very important moment for us to prove our value, right. By supporting these adaptive interventions and creating around those mechanisms the new insurance covers that you were hinting to that really help create the cash flows and the financing that will go in that direction. And it may sound very vague, but One of the things that we're really lacking at the moment is how do we compare across different adaptation measures. So you were talking about, Pam, managed forestry on the one hand, or canopies, as well as maybe roofs and, changing the pavements or elevating floors. All of that needs to get financed, and we need to be able to be at the table and say, yes, this is actually worth money, and this is how the value is going to come across.
Yes.
So I'm personally committed to do that. I think it's a pretty important leadership step that we need to take. In parallel, we need to have, as I said, the preparedness of pre-arranged financing, which is how I interpret insurance. Insurance is a contingent form of capital. And so there are things that in 2023 we have done, but I think it's just a glimpse into what I believe can be a very big business opportunity, again, for the industry. So we operate on two levers that are very important: data and technology that allow us to develop sustainable covers that actually perform as intended, because only through that we create real value. And let me give you a couple of examples. We've partnered with the New York City, the Center for the New York City Neighborhoods, in providing the first inner city parametric cover where, the unlocking mechanism amongst many was having accurate data to do intervention for extreme rainfall and storm surge, so that the most vulnerable inner city populations could be protected. And it's a pilot, and it took a lot of counterparts to work together. But we're confident that, having overcome the technological barrier, this can be replicated, can be scaled up, and can prove a lot of resilience building for populations and for emergency funding that otherwise would have not been available. One of the learnings that we had out of that is that the municipalities do not actually have, as part of their mandate, protecting populations through insurance as a lens.
Right.
They look at protecting assets, not necessarily people.
Right.
And so the insurance instrument was not recognized. There were lots of questions about, am I even allowed to use it? And so I think that is right there. We realized we solved the technological problem, but we realized there is a policy issue that, at least within the US, can be advocated more strongly, that yes, this is a valuable tool. And yes, indeed, we can do insurance or derivatives. Don't worry about the form. Whatever it allows you to actually get credit and have the money in the coffers, right, to pay out, we can do it. The second example I will give, and then maybe I can give another couple of things that we're doing later. Again, thinking holistically is what we've done in the Horn of Africa between us, the World Bank, a technology company, SwissRe, and it's called Drive. And what I love about this project is that insurance is only one piece of that mosaic. And the more we realize that we are important in as far as we work together, the better the outcome. In that project, the idea is to create market access for pastoralists through the diversification of revenue streams, improving the resilience of their revenue streams in the face of escalating catastrophic events like droughts. And the Horn of Africa has gone through 10 years of droughts. So if I just use insurance as an instrument, you would tell me, Veronica, 10 years from now, you can't sell that right. Because, you continue to have losses. But when we work together, we create the conditions under which the value chain can be adapted, and then insurance becomes available over and over again. And what is wonderful is that we are at least 2 years ahead of our outreach plan. We have 1.7 million people protected, but it's because we're working systemically.
Right. No, Veronica, I mean, I want to go with you and spread this gospel everywhere, because what gets me excited about the job that I do. And I'm going to ask Yoshihiro a question, but I just want to follow up with you, Veronica, because, you talked about the work you're doing across communities, local governments. And I want to ask you, for those of us regulators in the United States, and are having to face these dilemmas of and really forcing us to be creative, right? What do you expect from the regulators in California and the regulators around the country? What do you want to see us look at, prioritize, so that we continue to become a place where you want to invest and you want to stay and participate in these different markets? Because I think we really are looking towards not only our domestics now, but looking at what reinsurance companies need to be able to provide that coverage during such uncertainty.
I I think, Ricardo, what the working group has done in California is actually a bit landmark globally because the the ability to create. So ultimately, I think the regulatory environment creates the conditions through which we have visibility and predictability. And so to be able to collect data in an orderly fashion, so there is no issue of the accessibility of the data, so that instruments, decision, investments can be made. The ability to oversee different innovative solutions or possible adaptive interventions, and to be able, with a spirit of independence, to assess what good looks like.
Right.
What would be the intrinsic risks of maladaptation, for instance? I think that is incredibly valuable because together then we can walk in unison. And once we know that something actually hits 80% of our objectives, collective objectives, when we looked at it from different angles, we can make money flow with confidence. So to
Exactly.
me, the regulatory environment is one that help build confidence, dialogue, and predictability for people to make the investments that will take time and resources. And to know that that return will come because we have a stable environment is, for me, paramount.
Perfect. It's great to hear it. It's imperative to showcase what you need so that we can keep moving forward. One of the things that we're very proud of, as we just announced a couple of days at the national level, our first ever resiliency strategy as a group of states and regulators. One of that is the first of its kind climate data call, because we want to get that data nationally to be able to give you the confidence and the numbers and the data that we're all adhering to, because we still in the United States don't even have the data to start even having a conversation around what we're going to need. And so I'm glad that we're spot on, and thank you, Veronica. Yoshihiro, a core tenet of OECD, which I am a massive fan of, is the cooperation among member countries on economic development. And of course, climate change is intensifying climate risk, as you know, and as we've had many conversations at OECD, is intensifying throughout all our jurisdictions. How do you see governments working together to address these insurance protection gaps? I know it's very when I meet with my counterparts in Europe or in Asia or Australia, it's a country. In the U.S., since insurance is regulated by the states, you have 56 different jurisdictions, and as we're all trying to solve these protection gaps, your experience, what do you think? What type of level of cooperation do we need? What are some benchmarks that we need to be looking at in terms of closing these protection gaps sooner rather than later?
Thank you, Ricardo, and good morning, everybody. One key message, as Veronica and Pam and everybody, for this, enhancing the resilience of, of this NatCat issue is definitely collaboration, cooperation among all stakeholders. Just before talking, much in detail, I'm so amazed having come here first time COP, and in spite of huge effort that we have done, I really amazed that still states, government, subsidize coal and fossil energy $1.2 trillion. And that creates $7 trillion catastrophe, per year. So it's a human created issue, and definitely human find a solution, definitely should find a solution. And when we come back to our area of insurance, this issue, of protection gap and, enlarging protection gap, it's not like California, big developed, state or countries issue, but huge least developing countries, small island and so on. So in other words, every country should find a solution on this issue. And as Veronica's example is an extremely good example in Africa, insurance cannot be the solution. We have to work together, but we can take an important role. Regulators take important role, policymakers take important role. So in other words, this is definitely critical issue, existential issue for our industry, our regulators, and so on. So we should find a solution by ourselves. That's the first important key message. And collaboration is a key word. And one thing that I noticed after having heard Pan and Veronica, Veronica's wording is adaptation. My wording is ex ante. You know, ex ante means before crisis happens. Before crisis happens, scientifically and experience, it's much, much better if we prevent beforehand. As you know, good example, nature, and a good example of insurance. And if we combine preventive measures, avoid risk, and also if we combine this insurance arrangement before something bad happens, that's much, much better for the society. This is common sense, but this common sense cannot happen. But we have to make this common sense happen now.
Absolutely.
So this is a leadership issue, but also cooperation issue. Example of Africa. If we collaborate, not only insurance cannot do everything. If we collaborate community and health organization and others, we can find a solution. That's why like OECD or international cooperation is extremely important. Now, good news is thanks to this year, for example, G7 first in the history put this protection gap, is an issue for policy makers issue. OECD create international recommendation on this issue, and we reinforce this issue. And the ASEAN Plus, which I'm very much involved, ministers and so on, create this issue, permanent task force. So momentum is here, but what is important is to operationalize and make something good happens. Now, as you know, Veronica and others mentioned, data, for example, it's so basic but fundamental.
Right.
We have to collect, even
Right.
I
And
see
we
the
haven't
most
done it.
developed
Like-
countries have some data issue.
Right.
Those fundamentals, modeling is another example. And also education. If we understand the importance of insurance before, that's much, much better. People should recognize, not only people, citizens, but also policymakers. Those already, clear policy issues are here. So to make it happen and operationalize, and again, international cooperation is a key to make it happen.
Thank you, Yoshihiro. Yeah, sometimes it feels that we're still so behind and just getting the elemental steps that we need, those essential things so that we can start making these big decisions. Pam, I want to bring it back to you. And every time, EDF and all these amazing organizations, I often think when I was in the legislature, never did I, in my wildest dreams, I thought we were going to be talking, insurance in this scope. But I also feel that, destiny puts you in these positions. And when they ask me, like, you're going to run for insurance commissioner, like, you've done all these things. I'm like, well, we need an environmentalist running the Department of Insurance at the moment, and which has allowed us to create these really unique partnerships. And so I want to ask you, as we talk about, what are some of the potentials for innovation to promote insurance and sustainability in the future? And I want to, if you can share with us some of the opportunities of interweaving not only nature-based solutions, but climate more directly in the approaches for specific insurance policies, because that's what we want to, at the end of the day, that's what we need, right? How do we incorporate all these in the policies to help benefit our most vulnerable and create, I see it as creating a new green insurance market, for example. So just kind of want to get your thoughts around that.
So it's a great question, and this is really where the work of the working group is so valuable. I mean, there are a range of recommendations for the role the insurance industry can play in reducing risk directly by increasing resilience through investments in nature and closing the gap to ensure communities are protected. Highlight two specific examples, and others may have more. So one starting point could be insurance companies directly investing in a set of nature-based solutions designed explicitly to reduce liability. So you could, raise the revenue through a number of ways. You could assess a fee on the premium that would sort of give you a pool of resources to invest in the solutions. You could do, profit investment in resilience bonds to support the development of natural infrastructure. There's sort of a range of financing options, but these upfront investments could be tailor-made to actually reduce risk on the premiums that are being insured, while also providing really significant protection for communities at the same time, air quality benefits as well as carbon sequestration benefits. So that's sort of one example. You could also imagine a world in which insurance companies could think about how to include the benefits of nature-based solutions in how they do their underwriting, such as in incorporating this in modeling in some way. So the benefits of nature in risk reduction can actually be fully realized in the process, and both of you have touched this on. The value of the risk reduced for nature-based strategies could then be better incorporated into the cost of insurance policy. So maybe those are just two examples to highlight from the working
No, that's
group.
great. You're giving me ideas now, and so be careful. It's going to be dangerous now when we get back. Veronica, I want to, again, highlighting the innovation that we've already seen in the reinsurance world. What are some of the additional innovations that you are seeing in the marketplace that contribute to a more sustainable insurance sector throughout the globe?
Yeah, and guys hear me?
I think they'll, yeah.
Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
gotcha.
fantastic. So, so we are working on covers, and I'll answer that. But then, if I can, I want to add something to
Absolutely.
what Pam was saying about the policies and the conditions. So, things that we've been doing that I think we'll see the fruits of in 2024 to a full extent. We've been working on natural assets as an insurable risk or an insurable asset. And so for me, this is very important. It is part of a nature positive narrative, but it also has to be part and parcel of the policies. One of my advocacy works is to have national registers for natural assets.
Yeah.
When those get created, then those assets are going to be treated like any other physical asset, Ricardo.
Interesting.
And that is the condition under which the responsibility to assess, protect, restore becomes much more crisp. So we have a great momentum now after the COP in Montreal, and we know we have the 30 by 30, but this is an important step from local policy perspective that will make a difference. An example of where we are maybe a few months ahead of the time is what we did with the ADB in creating, as part of a coalition, again, with various different competencies, because we need different competencies at the table, to create resilience for coral reefs. And so SwissRe developed the first insurance cover. Everyone knows it back in 2017. Meanwhile, I think the good news is that a market for coral is developing from investment as well as insurance. So you have now, covers in Hawaii, covers in Belize that have been placed. But the important thing with the coral reef work that we're doing with the ADB is we're creating the analytics and the risk assessments today and tomorrow that allow us to develop then systemic solutions over time. And so for that, we need partners that, are good at managing these risks. And it's across 4 countries. It's no longer just a single application, right? So you see already there the scalability is starting to come through. And Indonesia, the Philippines, Fiji, and Solomon Island are very different. So each of these cases in itself becomes a prototype of something that could be replicated. The other thing where I think the intercept between the insurance and the rest of the financial industry is starting to show is in how do we integrate insurance capabilities into financial instruments for restoration and for adaptations. So we've been behind 2 this year in particular, 2 debt for nature swaps. And just for those of you who don't know it, so one in the Galapagos and one in Gabon. And what these mechanisms do is to take out debts that is typically at very high interest rates already in the market from countries that have a debt stress. So it's addressing that's the core problem, but making the new issuance of debt at more attractive terms, much more attractive, conditional to part of the delta going into conservation and restoration, which is one of the issues that we have. We know, even when we know that actions need to be taken, how do we fund it? This is a mechanism, and of course, to do all of this, there is a need to de-risk, and that's where the multilaterals come in, and that's where then we get crowded in as reinsurers. And so SwissRe has been part of syndicates of companies that have supported these activities. I can imagine structure of this type being created for adaptation. So it'd be great to do something in California where, you know, where if the money doesn't flow because the cash flows are not obvious, maybe we can do it this way. Another thing that we've done this year is protect wetlands in China, because they introduced the concept of gross ecological production on top of the GDP. And so they have demonstrative cases, and they say, well, we want to track and measure what are the key assets, well, wetlands are, how do we protect them from drought and or typhoons, and we develop those covers. So these are just examples of things that we can do, we've already done, we're working on. But if I could say, inspired by the work that the commissioner, you know, invited us to do for the last 2 years, we've also connected on extreme heat. So can I take another minute to talk about extreme heat?
I can talk about extreme heat all day. So
because I
take it
think
away.
extreme heat is one where we could all go hiding and say, this is chronicle, let's not touch it. But I don't think it's the responsible thing to do. We have to find ways of innovating and creating the conditions under which we address one of the biggest killers of the next 50 years. It will be heat, and it will affect disproportionately the most vulnerable populations. So we're attached, as I said, I have these vectors of business, insurance, and technology. So we're attached in multiple ways. We're working through the World Business Council and the WEF through alliances that are adaptation and extreme heat related. We've been part of your task force. We work with the Harsh Rock Foundation. We recently signed a partnership with the newly created Foundation of Climate Alliance for All. And so we will be working for covers in starting next year, but we're already ideating for India and Pakistan for women that work in markets with SEWA. And that will be, again, combining flood and heat together, because these are the most prominent risks. And we're working with Sydney to help, on the one hand, design covers for Sydney as a city, but also as part of a task force of resilient markets and repair markets. So again, it has to be integrated. And we have 2 projects in California. Maybe I don't go into the details, but we have interest. We developed the cover. We're looking now for the premium financing. Hopefully the administration will unlock it. But I'm very optimistic. There is so much that we can do already today around heat. And if we work in a concerted way, it will open more opportunities. It's a very tough risk to cover, but we should not shy away.
Exactly. And as you know, Veronica, in California, we are now going to be ranking these heat waves to get that data and look at, you know, through the work of the working group. Again, it seems like we're still struggling behind getting the data, doing the research around what are the insured and uninsured consequences of extreme heat.
So I'll give you some good news.
Yes.
There is a partnership we have with a tech company, which allows us now to analyze surface temperature.
Wow.
Something that even a year ago did not exist to this level of accuracy. So I think we're chipping away at the data issue.
Amazing. Yoshihiro, I wanted to check with you and see, you know, in terms of, you know, keeping it in the theme of innovations, because I know you've been doing a lot of this work. What are some of the innovations that you are seeing, and that what other countries are doing around sustainable insurance solutions, and you know, maybe the sea drift as a you know, looking at that or the other different risk pools that you see? I mean, I think you are also on the cusp of doing some really innovative work around the world. So we'd love to hear that.
In my intervention is very much focused on system or, you know, structure, and very much based on what Pam and, you know, Veronica and you, Ricardo, are discussing now. So key word is collaboration and also ex ante. Before or something bad happens, we should prepare. And Veronica's example of, you know, Florida, California, as well as Africa is quite similar, you know. Because of cooperation, this heat challenge can find a solution, and SwissRe or somebody take a lead to coordinate each other. And naturally, you know, measures is one important component of those issues. And what we encourage as a system to make it happen is all important stakeholders, policymakers, industry, regulators, community, all work together. And to make this happen, for example, SwissRe, this is Southeast Asian Disaster Risk Insurance Facility. What we do is to facilitate this collaboration. In practice, what happens in Asia or other parts of the world is the same, you know. Insurance company have expertise, and the government have a strong, you know, interest in the public policy too, but they don't talk to each other. Policyholders or policymakers often do not understand how insurance function. But in the end, what the disaster occurs, it's a huge payout, you know, and it's always very slow, and sometimes it's missing very important part. It takes usually a few years to, you know, cash out, and that's huge, slow down the economy and bad for the economy, not only economy, but people. So there is a strong interest, but they do not understand how insurance can be helpful. And the insurance companies have expertise and tool to do that, but they don't know how to communicate with the policymakers. So us, for example, SwissRe is owned by government. ASEAN government is an owner, so it's a kind of mutual of government. So they are sort of, you know, companies, but at the same time, they're interested body to do that. So when we talk, SwissRe talk with the government, they listen to, and of course, SwissRe itself is a very small sort of a conduit to provide insurance and solutions. So we work with industry and the community to work with the policymakers and the regulators to find a scheme. So that's how it works. But this is still quite infant stage, and we just kick off. But definitely, it's a huge potential for Asia. You know, we have 3 trillion public asset or public interest, and we could cover insurance or, you know, protection coverage. And this scheme does not limit to Asia. Any part of the other world can work. So anyway, this is innovative in the context of structure, but hopefully it will work.
No, absolutely, and we're very keen to looking at what's going on in SwissRe and really see how we can, you know, as we continue to monitor it, how can we create something similar? Because I really think, as you were saying, Yoshihiro, this is going to be, I'm very clear it's going to be successful. I know it's just in its infancy, but we can already tell it's already paying back dividends. Pam, I know we're running out of time. As we said, I can talk about insurance every day to anybody who wants to listen. But I want to put the lens back on regulators in the U.S. You know, who really we sit in these unique positions when, as you know, it's fascinating to me now, as Yoshihiro was talking, that nobody knows what the insurance commissioner does until there's a fire, a flood, or, you know, these extreme heat events, and really puts us in a position to really not elevate the work and why insurance is important and highlight the protection gaps. But I wanna ask you, Pam, you know, still in nature-based solutions, right? I think still in the U.S., still really infant, and as we talk about all the great work that's happening around the globe, and I wanted to ask you, you know, as we're in these positions, like, how can we play a more of impactful role in encouraging the implementation of nature-based solutions? You know, when I first heard the term, and I heard about SwissRe and the coral reefs, and I was, you know, flabbergasted that why have we even thought about this before and put a monetary number or category to these wonderful things that Mother Nature's put in place to protect us, and so. What are some thoughts that you and EDF have in terms of how do we spread the gospel around nature-based solutions for insurance regulators in the United States?
So my first response was going to be, we need to clone you. So I do think, I do think a big part of it is getting every insurance regulator to realize that it's actually part of their job.
Right.
So the evangelism that you bring to this work, I think, is actually really critical and is something that we all really need to encourage and sort of find ways to get you in front of more people and create sort of a more robust conversation. So thank you for leading the way. There are some specific steps to recommend as well. I'll highlight a few that also came out in this report. It's always good to start at the beginning with a strategy.
Right.
So that's sort of recommendation number one. Get insurance regulators together with state and federal agencies to develop a state or regional mitigation and resilience strategy. And that can include very tangible steps to accelerate urban greening, prescribe burns, floodplain mitigation, restoration, and other natural risk reduction strategies. And those efforts, the planning efforts, the strategy efforts, can include the insurance industry. And it will be quite valuable to think about the public-private partnerships that can come out of strategic planning and sort of early conversations, in part to help finance some of the strategies that are identified in the strategic plan. Local communities also being engaged in the process will help ensure that the plans can meet local needs, while also helping to educate residents about what their specific risks are and what some of the resilience solutions are and what they should be looking for in their policy. What should they be insuring themselves against, which is a critical piece of the puzzle. So that's sort of big picture step one. I realize we're running out of time. Maybe quickly, two other ideas. As we ask insurance companies to include the benefits of nature in their underwriting, we also need regulators to support such efforts. So data, and increase the data that can be used to incorporate nature-based solutions into modeling and forecasting, and that for us feels like a really critical piece of the puzzle. It's been talked about by others. And finally, just want to highlight an innovative approach that takes collaboration between the state and the state government, the insurance industry, and the regulator is a collaboration we've seen in North Carolina.
Yes.
In 2020, the state launched a new program to invest in flood protection through increased flood storage capacity and floodplain restoration. And by focusing on these natural infrastructure projects, the state can now better compete for unlocking federal dollars. But what's unique in North Carolina is that they can then sell flood reduction credits to create the U.S.'s first flood reduction marketplace. And that is high value. You can imagine how this approach can reduce risk and can also be an opportunity for corporate investment, for insurance company investment, and the type of project that can help reduce a community's risk and insurers' liability. So maybe a good example to end on. I'll
Yeah, no,
stop.
that is critical. And one of the things we've also looked at is how do we work with insurance companies, especially in certain municipalities, to ask the local governments to do an inventory of their assets, and how do we not only their infrastructure, but their natural assets, and how we can protect those and attach some sort of value to that, so then we can start working on creating those policies to protect those natural assets through some sort of inventory. So many times I've talked to so many council members and county government folks who don't realize that they have these natural assets, and which again allows us not only to protect them from development, but understand the importance that they play in the protection as climate becomes much more extreme. And so we ran out of time, but I just want to say that one of my goals this year, as I was talking to my staff, was to bring these dialogues actually back to the United States so that we can engage with nonprofits, consumers, and our domestic insurance companies to be able to see that, one, insurance companies should not be shying away from these discussions. We have clear examples from SwissRe leaning into these really difficult discussions and proving that, one, insurance companies can be successful, they can be innovative, as opposed to what common folks think, that insurance is this stale, conservative, just being that takes forever to move, when I think it's the complete opposite. Because if you think about the concept of insurance and how it was created, at its time was a very innovative idea. And so we are now at a crossroads where we have to once again work with our insurance industry and companies to innovate once again to meet this moment. And so I'm proud to say that we on Friday, that with our partners at the UN Principles of Sustainable Insurance, we are going to be hosting the first ever Global Sustainable Insurance Summit in Los Angeles in spring of 2024. And we need to keep the focus on innovative solutions and how we scale those and how we start, quite honestly, getting our domestics and our other regulators around the country to understand that the world is moving. The world has, the train has left, and we as United States regulators need to catch up. And so that is our plan and our goal with the summit, is to bring all of you to Los Angeles, my hometown, where we last year had the most hottest day recorded in history, in a community, Veronica, that you know very well, that of course are our most vulnerable people, outdoor workers, that are going to be the first to be susceptible to this ongoing, an additional ongoing threat. So I'll just close. Yoshihiro was saying, is it just wildfire in California? I'm like, I wish. It's never a dull moment in California, unfortunately. It's a beautiful place to live, but we have earthquakes, wildfires, extreme heat, coastal flooding, inland flooding, and of course wildfires. So it's never a dull moment in California. We hope we get you the invitation soon, and hopefully you guys can join us there. Let's give our panel a round of applause for this great conversation. Thank you so much. Should we get a picture?